quarterback analysis for week 6. I'm Jason Gilbo, J Gilbo11 with me, Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. Taking a look at cash game, GPP, and value quarterbacks. You are on the same ones as I am for DraftKings. It seems like a pretty easy group to go with.
Right, and there's a little bit of pricing discrepancy I've noticed, especially with some cheap guys on DraftKings. But for the most part, I mean, these well-aligned plays, they're transferable between DraftKings and FanDuel. And the first one I'm looking at is Drew Brees at home. You know, we could just leave the analysis at that and move on to the next guy because I don't think you really need to justify it anymore because you just look at the home road splits for Brees and they're absolutely amazing. And then throw in the fact that he's facing a Carolina team that's kind of downtrodden at the moment, especially looking at their secondary. They gave up that 500-yard game to Matt Ryan, 300 receiving yards, Julio Jones 2 weeks ago. And, I mean, coming into this year, Pro Football Focus had this secondary ranked dead last in terms of overall talent and player grades. So it's not like that game was an anomaly. The Panthers secondary is actually really struggling without Josh Norman. I don't really see how they correct it this fast. It's just going to be how their rookies do in pass coverage and develop over the season. I don't think they're really ready to take on the Saints on the road, especially with the Saints having an extra week to prepare with the bye week last time around. So, yeah, I really like Drew Brees, and I don't think I really need to say much more. This is one of the highest scoring games on this slate. So, I mean, all formats, lock and load Drew Brees.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely in agreement. And the one thing I like about Brees is, I mean, and the Saints in general is, obviously, you look at the Matt Ryan, Julio Jones game, it was just those two going off. And this one, I mean, you can lock in on one guy for Carolina's defense, but, you know, he's got 4 or 5 weapons that he can throw to and make it work. So this is really exploitable matchup.
Sure.
Ben Roethlisberger, you're talking about next, 8,700. You and I think, I know, look, kind of glossing over this. It's like you've seen the road splits mentioned, and it just doesn't matter to me.
Right. You need to put it into context every time you come across that. I mean, especially I said Drew Brees, home road splits. Obviously, if he's playing a team like Cleveland on the road and they're down, say, 2 cornerbacks, like you're still going to like that matchup, even though the past history says Drew Brees is not good on the road. Kind of the same thing with Ben Roethlisberger this week. He's been a lot better at home than the road in recent years, but he's facing the Dolphins, who've just been decimated through the air throughout the whole season. I mean, you saw A.J. Green absolutely go ham on them that Thursday night game. And then Marcus Mariota last week threw 3 touchdowns, ran for another one. We'll get to him in a little bit. But, I mean, the matchup very good for Big Ben, despite playing on the road against the Dolphins. And over the past 2 weeks, Big Ben has thrown 9 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 680 yards. And it's not a coincidence that came the exact same time Le'Veon Bell returned, because he just opens up so much in the passing game. He can get 100-plus receiving yards himself. And, I mean, it really just puts the ball in Roethlisberger's hands a lot more. Kind of like we said with Matthew Stafford earlier in the year, that extensions of the running game are screen passes, dump passes to the running back. That's what Big Ben's doing right now. He's eating up all that yardage because instead of handing the ball off to the running back, it's dump passes to Le'Veon Bell where Big Ben gets credit with fantasy points. So, I mean, it's all systems go yet again for Ben Roethlisberger. I don't think you can really go wrong with him or Drew Brees for a similar salary on FanDuel.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. These two are my guys that I'm going to be hedging with a lot of, and also looking to kind of pair them up. In terms of GPP quarterbacks, Marcus Mariota, 7,600, so we get down to kind of a step-down price. Coming off his best week of the year so far, and gets another matchup here where he can continue that.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. He's playing very confidently coming off that game against the Dolphins last week. 3 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, as I said earlier. And this is arguably his best matchup of the season, playing the Browns at home. So, I mean, he's definitely one of those guys who has a very wide range of outcomes. That's why you're considering him as kind of a GPP diversifier if you're making multiple entries, having a couple of him. But he definitely has that upside just because he could run one in on the ground, could have 50-plus rushing yards. Obviously, you're not banking on that because rushing yards for quarterbacks They scramble. Sometimes they get design runs, but mostly it's scrambling yardage. Can't necessarily count on that, but the matchup is just great here. And the price is relatively suppressed. 7,600 is all. That's one of the cheaper starting quarterbacks we have on this slate. So I really like the upside for that price considering this matchup.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, 25.5 total there. You got to think Mariota's going to be a part of it. You kind of look at DeMarco Murray and the way he's worked into the passing game as well. I think that gives him, a little bit higher floor and ceiling, just because that's kind of come into play this year. Alex Smith, 6,800 at the Raiders, below 7K here. In a GPP, I mean, we always kind of think of as Alex Smith as just kind of a boring quarterback, but in the right matchup, I mean, there is some upside.
He is a boring quarterback, but the biggest determinant of his fantasy success week to week comes in the form of game flow. Will Kansas City have to throw the ball? Because they don't throw it unless they have to. That's when Smith has his bad fantasy weeks. And that's ultimately what leads to his price being only 6,800, one of the cheapest quarterbacks we have this week. And against the Raiders, I'm anticipating a little bit of a shootout here. We know Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, awesome connection to begin the season. And this Kansas City Chiefs secondary, last time we saw them, they got blown out at Pittsburgh. So it's not unreasonable to think of Derek Carr as a GPP play as well. But Alex Smith on the other side of that, a lot cheaper, only 6,800, like I said. And he's probably going to have to throw the ball just to keep pace in this game. The Chiefs are also coming off a bye week, so you have to figure they'll have a solid game plan in store, and they'll be ready to go this week against the Raiders, who have the 30th ranked pass defense so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to kind of pay up at running back and wide receiver and get some exposure elsewhere, I mean, Alex Smith is kind of a good guy to just plug in there. And he's also got a little bit of rushing upside, so that can help out as well. The Brian Hoyer section, I think, is what we should call it now for our articles, because if they're going to keep pricing like this and he can just kind of keep doing what he's doing, there's no real need to change it out each week.
Well, how about we just rename this whole podcast the Brian Hoyer Podcast and just put his face on it instead of the FanDuel logo and call it good?
I think so. I mean,
that's what the listeners have come to expect every week now, because Brian Hoyer, granted, his price has risen from 6,000 to 7,000, but I think we can all agree that that's still way too cheap. Past 3 games as a starter, he's thrown for over 1,000 yards, 1,067 yards, 6 touchdowns, 0 picks. So just let that sink in for a moment there. He's only 7,000 despite that. And he's facing the Jaguars this week at home. Jaguars ranked 26th overall pass defense. Not really an intimidating matchup at all. So I think we can safely expect another 300-plus yards, maybe a couple touchdowns. And you have to really like the way things are going, considering Alshon Jeffrey probably not 100%, and the Lions really took him away last game. But despite that, Hoyer's still chucking to anyone with a pulse. I mean, Eddie Royal and some other guys in there. You have to really like the way he's just distributing the football, getting into anyone who's open and just running the system much better than we ever thought Jay Cutler could.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this, you've seen some people complain about Jeffrey's targets, and obviously the health really hasn't been there. But, I mean, the way he's spreading out the ball, Zach Miller, I mean, Karen Meredith, I mean, those are guys that, secondary pieces on other teams. And he's making them look like featured role guys here, which they are. So it's a pretty cheap stack to go with. And 7K, I mean, as you mentioned, the prices come up, but that's still good enough for me, really, in cash and GPPs.
Right, and you can look at Zach Miller, like you said. He's still cheap at tight end. Pair him there. Or Cameron Meredith as a wide receiver 3, especially in tournaments. Obviously, you'd like to see a little more consistency. We aren't sure exactly what his role is, but he had a whole helping of targets last week, over 100 yards, I think 9 receptions, kind of stepping into that Kevin White role. And with Alshon Jeffrey and Eddie Royal, possibly less than 100%, more targets could funnel towards Meredith. So I kind of like that stack in GPPs too, considering he's only 5,300 on FanDuel.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. It's going to wrap things up for the FanDuel quarterback analysis for Week 6. Be sure to check out DaveFantasyCafe.com for all our great tools and content.